there are a lot of things we do in this Western society that we're all a part of that really emphasizes power and hierarchy and that puts things in a certain order so that certain people benefit really well and others don't. And so one of the questions is, well, is this the best way? Is this the natural way? Could this be, can we think of a different way of doing this in such a way that, we do have harmony?
We live in a time when the old maps seem to be failing. And there's a deep collective ache to learn another way to live with one another. You just heard a slice of what's to come in today's conversation. Welcome. I'm David Achata. As an executive coach and author, I've spent my career helping people navigate change. But to go forward, we often have to look back. I created this season to explore how Indigenous wisdom can help us grow into the people our future needs. And whether you're looking for personal healing, better leadership, a deeper faith, or a new way to dream, I'm glad you're here. We're widening this circle this season to rediscover what it means to walk in a good way. So welcome to the How People Grow podcast season 6. Well, today my guests are Danny Zacharias and Chris Hoklotubbe. And so good to have both of you here. Who are Danny and Chris? Tell us about who you are, your work, and where you're from.
All right, I'll start. Yeah, my name's Danny Zacharias. Thanks so much, David, for having us here. So I am originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's Treaty 1 territory in Canada. If you think of North America, we're like dead center, belly button. And my maternal ancestry has resided in that area for millennia. And my maternal heritage is a mixture of all three of the peoples that are in Manitoba, the Cree, Anishinaabe, and the Red River Métis. And so I grew up there, eventually moved out to a little town called Wolfville, Nova Scotia with my wife, Maria. And that's in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples. And I moved out here to study and had a family here and continued on. And now I'm the Associate Dean and Professor of New Testament Studies at Acadia Divinity College. I also serve as an adjunct professor for NAITS, an Indigenous learning community, and one of my roles beyond adjuncting and teaching once in a while is I am the editor for the journal as well for NAITS.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris.
One of the editors, I should say, not just the editor, one of the editors.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, what about you, Danny?
Oh, actually, it's funny because I would say it's good that Danny went
Or Chris.
because there's a joke between us that all my best stuff comes from Danny. So by hearing Danny's life and curricula vita there, you get to know a little something about me and where my ideas come from.
Nice.
So I am mixed settler and indigenous descent. I am a member of the Achata Nation in Oklahoma, although I was raised in Southern California and did my studies in Boston and Los Angeles, and now I find myself in the middle of Iowa. I'm just leaving a teaching post at Cornell College, and I am coming into a new role as the director of the Indigenous Theological Circle at Bexley Seabury. And what's beautiful about this, it's a joint appointment between this Indigenous Circle as well as NAITS and Indigenous Learning Community, for which for the past few years I've been the coordinator for graduate studies. And that means I lead their Master of Divinity program as well as their other master programs for NAITS. And what's great about NAITS is the first Indigenous designed, developed, delivered, and governed graduate program for theological education that's accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. So my background is New Testament studies. I do Pauline studies, and yeah, happy to be on the show. I should also add I have two daughters and a wonderful wife. Claire and Emily are, 12 and 8, so we're just past the bluey stage, but
Okay.
it still resonates with our hearts.
Did you call it the Bluey stage?
The Bluey. I call this era around a Disney cartoon show that's about two
Okay.
Australian healers.
Oh, nice. Cool. Well, thanks, Chris. Danny, I didn't catch. Do you have any kids?
Yeah. So yeah, once we moved here to Nova Scotia, my wife Maria and I, that's when we started having our family here. So I have four kids, ranging from 9 to 22.
Wow, amazing. Well, guys, I'm so excited to have you here. And this whole season is on what Indigenous wisdom could teach us today. And today meaning 2026 when we're recording this. And I thought I would start with you because you've just written this book called Reading the Bible on Turtle Island. And what I'm fascinated about with your book, as I was looking at the introductory sections, is this whole idea of the blinders that we have as a culture that we don't even know that we have on with how we read sacred texts, the assumptions we carry about how reality should look, about our role in that reality, even about the distance back through which the dominant stories that affect us go. Like many times, those of us in the dominant culture, we don't even think, oh, I'm actually really informed by a story that's not terribly old. So I thought let's start with these guys and let's talk about the reality through which we view the world. And so I think to kick off, this conversation, what I'm curious about is what's Turtle Island?
Yeah, so Turtle Island, we made it, Chris and I made an intentional choice, and we're glad that the publisher went along with it to use a bit of an obscure, for some concept right in a title, which, isn't always the greatest marketing choice, but we
Hmm.
really needed to signal something. And the big thing we wanted to signal is that the place where people reside, particularly in Canada and the US, has names that are attached to it that are much have a much longer, deeper, and rich history
Hmm.
than the United States of America or Canada. And so Turtle Island harkens back to a creation story held by numerous First Nations, particularly along the plains. And there's little bits of variations on those stories. My people, the Cree, have a variation on the story that's just a little bit different, but you can read about this story in our book. But the story is about a sky woman who falls through a hole from the heavens down, and the animals kind of gently guide her down, and she's placed on the back of a turtle. And from there, they recognize she needs land in which to live and prosper. And so they need to gather mud from the bottom of the waters. And different animals take turns essentially trying to gather this for the woman to help her. And it's something they're unable to do until finally the final animal, and this is where you have differences amongst different creation stories of which animal it is. Also, differences on whether the animal ultimately dies in the work of receiving it. In the story we tell in the book, the final animal does die, but the animal is kind of clutching a bit of the dirt in the paw, and they spread it out along the back of the turtle, and that becomes Turtle Island. And like we say, if you kind of look at North America and you squint a little bit, you can almost see a turtle shape.
Yeah.
You have Alaska as kind of one of the arms. You have the tail in
Mm.
Mexico. You have kind of the parts in Canada that are kind of the other paw, as it were. And so
Yeah.
that's the creation story that has given name to this place that existed long before. And we want to signal in that we are interested in where we are and the history of the place and the peoples that resided here.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. What was it that motivated the two of you to put these two ideas together and make a book about it? I mean, Bible, people think normally, oh, that's for the Christians. Those are from, the Jews, the Old Testament scriptures and what we would call the New Testament, for Christians. So you put these ideas of the Bible and Turtle Island together, and then there's many people who would say, why are you even putting these two things together? They don't even actually really belong together. So tell us a little bit about your motivator and how you went about creating this project.
So I could probably speak for both of us insofar that in our own doctoral studies, we've really benefited from reading really beautiful books and texts on African American interpretations of the Bible, Hispanic Latino, Asian American interpretations of the Bible. And yet there was really nothing on the market or in our libraries that lifted up the ways in which people's indigenous identity and heritage and culture frames and shapes how they read the Bible. You know, when I was raised in my church, I was told that the Bible is God's love letter to us, and it's beautiful, and there's truth to that. And yet, the Bible, I'm removed from that first audience, the first intention of who it was for,
Mm.
and the
Hmm.
cultures are so different. And what you learn in seminary and what you learn in your graduate programs is that who you are and everything that shapes who you are, where you're from, your family, your experiences, shapes the kinds of questions you bring to the text and what you're looking for, or the kind of assumptions you make about how the world is. So, for the African American tradition, when you go to an African American church, I had a blessing and pleasure to serve in one for 1 year as an intern. The story of Moses and the Exodus is really important, that being
Yeah.
rescued from Pharaoh. And that plays a much more predominant role as a story that's returned to than any of the predominantly white churches I've been in. And it's not like a better or less than, it's a distinction that's really interesting to lean into. And so if there are these distinctions for these communities, what distinctions might there be for Native American and First Nations communities?
Hmm.
So Danny and I were both actually thinking about this separately, and when we came together, we said, well, why don't we write this book together? And actually lean into a more indigenous way of writing, which is to lean in on community, which is also actually a biblical way of writing because the biblical authors, we look at Paul's letters and they're written in community and written with multiple authors as
Hmm.
well. Um, so, actually to go back to the story that Danny told, um, one of the things that's supposed to be, or one of the lessons of the story of Sky Woman falling on and being rescued by these animals is this lesson that we are interdependent with creation, that we rely on creation, that we're kind of needy. And if it wasn't for animals, we would not be well. And so, if you take these lessons and you take these values that we really do need each other and humans are interdependent upon the world around them, from an indigenous perspective, then we hold these and say, well, where do we find this in the Bible? Now, that's not a question that my evangelical church was asking
Right.
every Sunday,
Yeah.
but it's a question that's near and dear. And so when you ask that question, you are going to find things that then align with that or that answer that question.
Mm.
So this is one of the gifts that an indigenous reading brings to the wider church is that uh, we ask different questions and we point out things that have been there all along that uh, others have just not attended to. And I think
Yeah.
that's the beauty of having a multicultural, multivocal reading of the Bible, that we bring multiple people to the table, is that whether it's people's experiences of coming from migrants that are recent immigrants, or it's struggles with government authority, or police brutality, or other kinds of things, that the Bible actually resonates with a lot of these themes.
Mm.
And by sitting with other stories, these themes sing a kind of a new harmony or new resonance
Mm.
that makes it all the more richer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up this subject of social location in your book and knowing your own social location. And I think that those of us in North America, in particular from my context in the United States, we have these blinders on and we don't really even know the social location from which we are reading into our faith or even into culture. For me personally, it's been like about a 5 year journey of digging into my own story and understanding, oh, this is why I felt some discord. So maybe you could unpack some more about how is it important and why to understand your social location, which could be your culture, your race, skin color, or your privilege. Yeah, speak to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, appreciate hearing that. And I know I haven't had a chance to listen as much as some of your other podcasts. So I know you've talked about this in other venues too, but
Hmm.
I mean, this is very much Chris and my story as well,
Hmm.
where, for a long time, it was in the background. And we've often been taught that, your Christian identity trumps everything else
Hmm.
instead of integrates everything else, right? Makes everything else beautiful. And so, part of our social location, Chris and I, and you know, your previous question of why bring these things together
Hmm.
is because they were already together in us and in our history.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
My indigenous heritage is also the place where I received my Christian heritage. Where I encountered the gospel through my indigenous relatives, and so and yet there's the juxtaposition of the church and of my wider country trying to get rid of the Indian problem. Those
that's right.
that's quotes from history, right?
Yeah.
And so and that my Christian identity trumps it all. And I just don't think that that's how Christianity is supposed to work. It doesn't seem to me to be the message of Jesus that we encounter in the New Testament. And so part of my social location, part of Chris's, is he is Choctaw and he is a believer. He's a follower of Jesus. He's compelled by the story of Christ. I am a Cree and Métis and Anishinaabe guy, and I'm Austrian too on my dad's side, and I'm a believer in Jesus.
Mm.
And so I don't think these things trump one another. I think that they come together. They're meant to come together
Mm.
rather than trumping things, one above the other. That is the heritage, I think, of a colonial way of thinking. Something subsumes something else, pats something down, and takes over. Instead of saying it comes in, it enters in, it transforms. And so that's part of our social location and part of our journey, your journey as well, is recognizing there's a history behind me that I was told to leave in the past, but I actually want it to be part of who I am. And so it's that cultural reclamation. And I'm doing it in conversation and in integration with the faith that I have as I'm a follower of Christ.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so good and kind of obvious, you know. It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
in me already. It's already together. I think that this is one of the hallmarks of the collision of worldviews. Like, one is really intellectual, just believe the right things. One is paying attention to what is true in your body, what's true in the land. And that's been a big growth area for me is learning to see, like, even when I take a hike, to go and look down the valley and see the rivers and say, wow, that looks just like the neural pathways in my body. Like, it's all tied together.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as you look at these things from the perspective of what's already in us, maybe it would be helpful for us to back up a little bit. And there may be some of our listeners who don't really think a lot or often about these words of a colonial way of thinking or even a decolonized way of viewing the world. Could one or both of you speak to how would you describe those things?
When we think about colonization, um, this is describing power relationships and coercive power relationships that one community or nation state or empire is coming in and spreading its culture and its way of life at the expense of or assimilating, erasing another groups of people in order to make their own nation state more efficient or stronger or beneficial. When we talk about decolonization, where we are talking about communities thinking about the ways in which their own um, cultural identity has been erased or has been challenged, and inviting them along a path to reclamation. But that said, there's never a full, pure going back. Uh, and it's not like culture has never been static. Culture is always changing. And uh, And there is maybe no pure culture, but the invitation to decolonization, I've heard it put this way, is that it's an invitation to move back into right relationship,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like between communities, between nations, between individuals. Because at the heart of it, the heart of the highest values of indigenous communities is to live in right relationship with one another, with Creator, and with all created beings. And so uh, there are a lot of things we do in this Western society uh, that we are all a part of that really emphasizes power and hierarchy, and that puts things in a certain order so that certain people uh, you know, benefit really well and others don't. And so one of the questions is, well, is this the best way? Is this the natural way? Could this be, can we think of a different way of doing this in such a way that, we do have harmony? That's not a blueprint or a demand of what things look like, but it's an invitation for people in certain communities to figure that out for themselves in a good way.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah, and I
like
would
that.
add also that that language of decolonization, the origin of that is about land, right? It arose in the context of land back initiatives. This land um, belongs to, in the sense that these people are spiritually connected to this place. And so part of decolonizing is recognizing all the ways that that has been fractured because of the colonial project. You think about the forced removal, you think about boarding schools or residential schools in Canada, you think about treaties that were not honored. All of these things were about fracturing the relationship between the people and their land. And so anytime we think decolonization, we need to be going back to that origin and saying, what needs to be restored for harmony, like Chris said. And so much, I mean, for Indigenous people, um, land is part of our identity, which means that colonization fractured identities.
Mm-hmm.
And so recognizing that and then moving towards, again, restoring that right relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a foreign concept to many people who either don't know this story or who are just from another worldview, that our land is central to how we understand ourselves and we understand our connection with the spiritual world. And I want to I want to dig in here and ask you about how Indigenous people affirm Creator's presence on land, on their land, long before this colonial project we're talking about. And so, how might understanding this reshape how we think about history, how we think about place, and even our sense of belonging as a people?
I mean, the first thing I'd say, and Chris will jump into, is that the the basis of colonization was the doctrine of discovery. That gave a religious fervor to it and understanding. And, at the root of that was the idea that this land was not inhabited by people deserving of it. They weren't Christian peoples, and therefore it could be claimed for these sovereign nations in Europe. And, undergirding that is an assumption that this was, that they were all godless heathen savages. This was a godless territory. It's empty land, terra nullius, that then can therefore be claimed. And, that's something that in our book, Chris and I firmly reject and say, the basis of how we encounter God in the scriptures, in our cultural traditions, etc., is because we believe Creator was always present and has always had a relationship with the peoples of Turtle Island. We weren't introduced to the Creator by the missionaries. We already had relationship. It doesn't mean that the gospel didn't bring something new and beautiful, um, but it's that the message came as if they were introducing Creator for the first time to us, and yet that's not the case. And so, how do we rethink with better Christian imagination how the gospel intersects with First Nations culture, because the foundation of it for so long has been you never knew God. God wasn't here until we came, and taught you about it.
Hmm.
And so we're having to unlearn things and then start relearning things.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's that process that we're, again, Chris and I have gone through, and we've tried to articulate in our book in some measure.
Chris, it looks like you want to add something to that. What are you thinking?
If I might take a slightly related and different direction, when I think about life at its best for me and growing up as a child, I have these distinct memories of gardening with my grandmother. And she just had the greenest thumb ever. Like her garden was full of all the most beautiful flowers, and she would just take us into that soil. And um, it was just time with her. It was time to make something beautiful, and it was great to kind of come back to her house and then see what we had done together. And I draw that because I connect this back to Genesis. We're going to keep coming back to Genesis and other stories, but the story of the Bible starts in a garden and also ends in a garden, because in Revelation there is a tree at the center of the city, and there's a river that comes from that. And again, it's not just Central Park. This is a very green city that nature is living in harmony with this new collection of humanity that's around it. That even the vision of Scripture bookends our story with us in relationship to land and the green spaces around us. And when you carry this theme and look for this further, it's not a novel idea that humanity at its best and part of our identity is related to the land. We take this to one of the most central ideals and values in Scripture, which is this idea of the Jubilee year, or this hope for the Jubilee year. Um, which was this law that was in ancient Hebrew culture, and it was actually what we was interesting to learn is actually in a lot of ancient Mediterranean culture. Uh, our friend Michael Rhodes pointed this out to us, but that every 50th year, after a season of 7 years, 7 cycles, 7 years, um, you're supposed to give whatever land that you've purchased from people who are in debt back to those people, that everyone gets their land back and gets to be on their ancestral land where their families are buried. Um, and it's a reset, it's an economic reset. It's almost unthinkable today.
Yeah.
But at the heart of it is that people are connected to their space, that the flourishing of the Hebrew tribe is to be connected to those ancestral lands. And so, yes, things happen. You go into debt, you need to sell your land, you need to survive, but your family is going to be reconnected to this, and your children are begin to give that second chance to be connected to where their grandparents and great grandparents are buried, and that they've had this long nurtured relationship. And then when we see the Jesus teachings and get to his first sermon, right, the thing that he is preaching on and that he is referencing is again this Jubilee year. Like this is the year, like this year of the Lord's favor is the Jubilee year. You're going to see it fulfilled in me. Uh, so again, we see this great arc that even Jesus has not forgotten about this great vision of people being reconnected to each other and to land in a very spiritual way. And then lastly, I mean, even in between this arc, we pop into one of the things we talk about in our book is Naboth's vineyard, right? Like where Ahab wants to buy this vineyard, and Naboth is like, I can't sell this to you. This is my ancestral vineyard. Like, yes, the money's great, but I have this covenantal duty that God has demanded me not to sell my ancestral land and to take care of this. So again, these aren't threads or patterns that I was prepared to look for in my upbringing as a Southern California evangelical. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that this is a deficit or just trying to like dunk on this, but I'm saying this is the richness and invitation of an indigenous way of reading that helps us to see things that have always been there. Is one of the things that Danny and I talk about is that indigenous people, indigenous culture are much more similar and akin to ancient Hebrew and Galilean culture than 21st century Canadian United States values. And in fact, biblical scholars have long been doing indigenous interpretations of the Bible. We've just called it ethnographic or anthropological or cultural readings of the Bible when we talk about the values of honor, shame, and kinship in agrarian societies. Uh, Biblical scholars are looking for models of ways of living to help tell better, richer stories, to imagine how ancient Galileans read. Well, those ethnographers and anthropologists are gathering their data and their models for community from observing indigenous communities
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
globally.
Mm.
So there is this richness, and it's not just an arbitrary cultural imposition or eisegesis on the text. This is actually really good exegesis.
Mm. You are throwing out so many classes right here in just a few paragraphs. Like we could sit down and talk about each of these for so long. But the one that stands out to me, I want to back up again. So it's like we're going forward, one step forward, two steps back, you know? And this is for either of you. Danny, a moment ago, you mentioned the doctrine of discovery. And this is something that actually many people don't understand, even that's baked into the founding documents of our country in the United States. And I want to hear a little bit more about that and how that has damaged our perspective of land. And again, I'm putting it in the context of what Chris just said about the importance of understanding land. Well, both of you have said that. And if we're going to recover a way to view the world that has a land-based connection, it's probably important for us to understand this thing called the doctrine of discovery. So, can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the again, we talk about the doctrine of discovery briefly in our book. Another great book, just to throw it out there for listeners, is by Sarah Augustine, The Land is Not Empty,
Hmm.
following Jesus in dismantling the doctrine of discovery. And yeah, so, in Canada, when we did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and we had calls to action, um, uh, as a way to try and heal from the residential school, um, the years of residential school. One of the components is to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, and specifically, the calls to action were to religious groups, Christian groups, because it comes from the Catholic Church. So it was a series of what were called papal bulls, um, kind of these authoritative declarations, and it undergirded uh, colonization, that it uh, gave claim over lands that Christian peoples were not in. And so it was a way to dehumanize people. They're not Christian people, so they're not, they don't have legitimate claim to a place. It was a way to uncivilize the people. They're not civilized. They don't have proper civilization. They need it from us. And it was a way, obviously, to then sever that relationship with their land. And that again, that's a huge thing, like we said. And the doctrine of discovery was theological. It was theological in basis. We saw, like you said, you have it in founding documents. You also have it historically in Christian sermons and letters, that the European colonizers take up the language of Joshua conquering the promised land, and of course that means we're the Canaanites on Turtle Island, and it's a necessary evil that we got to kill them off, kind of thing. Um, so that's severing, and how do we, the question you asked of how do we bring that back? That's a big part of what we hope our book accomplishes, is helping people see that in our own text there is a deep connection to land and place, that is very much akin to cultural connections the world over. Everyone is indigenous from somewhere. You have an origin story. And you've been folded into the origin story of God if you are a believer as well. And so, what does the Bible say about belonging to land and how we are to understand creation around us? Because colonization made it it made it a commodity that's about ownership, owning things, fee simple title over lands. Um, but as they came over with that perspective of trying to own things, conquer things, take things over, this was totally foreign to indigenous worldview. It's foreign to the Hebrew worldview. Uh, the Torah is very clear that the land is owned by God, and you are there always by grace and goodness, and that the land takes care of you. And so this is a relational. This is language of relationship. It's not language of ownership. You own things that you don't have any relationship to. It's just things. But the Bible doesn't talk about land that way. It talks about a
Mm-hmm.
place that you belong to, that cares for you, and that you reciprocate towards.
Yeah.
And that's just very foreign. Uh, it's foreign in our Western mind. It's foreign, especially in a capitalistic landscape where it's about things and ownership. And we're trying to continue to push back against that using not only the language, the good language and speakers and thinkers and worldviews of indigenous peoples, but reminding people that there's an indigenous worldview in the Hebrew Bible too that also speaks this way about how we ought to relate to land.
Hmm. That's so powerful. It reminds me of the story you told in your book about, I think it was an older woman walking through a field, and she said to those with her, "Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but you stepped on a flower on the way here. On the way back, I want you to go back and smell that flower and know that this is nature's way of giving to you, even though you've stepped on her." What a good story. And that leads me to wonder. So many people are listening, thinking, hey, this is powerful, this is inspiring, but we are so far down the line. We have bought and sold land. We're in 2026. We can't undo all this. I desire to do something better with my life and in this world and to honor those who are here in some way, shape, or form. But how on earth? I'm just one person. So how do people, how are people able to say, I want to make a return to the land. I want to have a land-based perspective, but I have no idea how to do that. So what can the indigenous perspective teach us about this?
One of the books that's shaped a lot of my imagination as of late has been Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. And, she would talk about go and build a garden, go and plant strawberries, go and be like my grandmother, my German immigrant grandmother, and plant flowers in your backyard, right? Develop that relationship. Start first with something small that is in your circle and see what happens there. Uh, there's this beautiful scene where Robin's daughter asks her, "Do you think your garden loves you? I know how much you love your garden." And as she's, tending her strawberry patch and eating a berry, she's like, I do think my garden loves me. It's producing, and we're this like relationship, and there's this like deep appreciation of beauty here. Um, I think there's something special to begin there. One of the things we talk about in our book too is that there are a number of different ways in which church communities, as they see certain church buildings or properties kind of wind down for their lifespan, and that the congregation is dwindling, and they're trying to think how do we be good stewards with these resources in this land, is that they're participating in these land back ceremonies where they're building relationships with indigenous communities that are there and saying, hey, you can have this land, and we want to give it to you ceremonially. But it's not just a like, here, take this land. It's at the heart of it too is a relationship built between these people. And sometimes they're even invited back into the caretaking of that land. We were just actually on a farm this fall in Kitchener, Ontario, where land had been given back from the city to this indigenous collective community, and they're farming on it. And they're not only are they farming on it and producing great things, they have cultural lessons for children from local schools that come there, and so they're hosting and they're talking about indigenous ways of relating to the land. But they've also created space on that plot for other immigrant communities like Somalis and others who happen to be living there to also plant items that are from their home country onto that land so that they can have food
Hmm.
that they're growing themselves that reflects their
Hmm.
culture. So it's this great hospitality and relationship building that's happening there. So it all that to say, you start small and big things can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we work as like you said that idea, I'm just one person, but
Hmm.
none of us are just one person. We're connected to people. We're connected to groups. Chris gave that example of churches, um, doing land back. There's there's a huge concern. There's a book called Gone for Good question mark. It's talking about the fact that in the next 20 to 30 years, there's going to be massive land transfers, especially in the States, from churches, and it's a question mark where it's going to go. If there's any indication, from how society functions right now, it's just going to go to the highest bidder, which are going to be corporations. But what if we could change that perspective and say the best thing to do is to restore it to the peoples it belonged to in the first place, right? So, the next couple decades, this is going to be a huge issue, and it's going to go under the radar if people don't call attention to it. The other thing I would say, David, is because we talk about land as relationality, then if you are that person or that family in a particular city, start by asking questions of relationality. Where does your water come from? What's the greatest threat to that water source right now? How's your air quality? What's making it worse? Is there endangered species that are within 100 kilometers of me? What's making them endangered? Is there something I can do? Right. So asking those relational questions and responsibility, right? It's about roles and responsibility. What's my responsibility to the place that I belong to? Because this place is feeding me and giving me air and water. Like all the things I literally need to live are being provided by this place. How do I reciprocate?
Hmm. That's beautiful. We don't think often about those simple things like how do I drink? How do I eat? What are the threats to that? We tend to think individually, like even my question, I'm just one person. And I want to come back to that in a second as a kind of a big bucket to open up briefly while we're still together. But again, I want to back up just a little bit because what we have been talking about is churches giving land back to the people whom it was originally inhabited by, which I think is beautiful. I've actually until this conversation never even heard that, so I think that's amazing. I do have, however, a whole other group of people that may be listening, and it is friends, clients, colleagues who are in the corporate world, and they view the world through products. We're making tires. We're making lumber for houses. We're making soft drinks, as an example. And I wanted to hear your perspective about what do you think leaders and organizations' version of that is? So churches, right, land back, but we have leaders in organizations on land making products that are for the community, potentially even for the entire country. So how can people like that think about land-centered sustainability systems, even healthy team ecosystems? It's a big one, but I'm just wondering, what's your perspective on that one?
I mean, I'll say what I think. I just don't know.
Did I
Uh,
stump you?
oh no, I'm a idealist instead of a realist, but
Okay.
I would say as I see what happens in the world and with business and corporations is that if the main, if your primary responsibility is to the stockholders to increase that, then everything becomes secondary. But if your primary responsibility is to the sustainability of the places you occupy and the people, that changes things. Um, but unfortunately, that isn't how markets function. There are smaller, beautiful examples of businesses and corporations that aren't driven by the bottom line and their stockholders that do. transformative work in communities and lands and spaces, but that's not the majority. But what if it was? What if those beautiful examples of local businesses that work to make their area, their communities more thriving and flourishing? What if that happened on larger scale? So that would be my idealistic anti-capitalist response.
I, I would add to just, more references to my family. My dad always says, how do you leave whatever place you go into a little bit better than what you found it into? And what if that was a corporate value of how do we leave our relationships with the land, with our those who are buying things from us, the very people within our systems, how are people better as a result of this rather than just that bottom line, let's
Mhm.
make more money for stockholders.
Yeah.
And I also think about my brother-in-law. He has this tradition every year. He watches It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas time,
Hmm.
right? And it's just this very beautiful story, and I'm sure your viewers know it, right? Of one man's worth to a community who wasn't about just profit, but was about community sustainability. And it's about this little town, right? But I think we can take that analogy, expand it to all our relations, and think about what it's like to try to make things and leave things just a little bit better for the water and
Hmm.
for the environment. Because even products, right, have byproducts. And the question is, well, what are you producing? Is it poisoning the land and is it poisoning the waterways? Right now, Iowa is really struggling because our water quality is really bad because we're using all these different kinds of pesticides and things to help our crops, but it is damaging our waterways, and we have really scary percentages of cancer right now. Like our farmers are, and the pesticides are not living in a good way with the rest of Iowans. And maybe it gives a little bit more stability to our corn, but if it's killing our people, that's not a good trade-off.
Yeah. The thing that I hear both of you saying is to be thinking about relatedness. And back to the Western informed question, I'm just one person. I love the response. Well, actually, you're not. Danny said, you're not. You're connected to people. And I do have one more bucket of questions I want to ask you about this idea of kinship, relatedness to land, to one another, to God. And as we think about this Western framework that many of us are in, we are immersed in this world that prioritizes individual achievement over that connectedness that we're talking about. Whereas indigenous traditions are emphasizing and have emphasized kinship, reciprocity, relational ethics. So, as we think about this, how might this shift, meaning to connectedness, how do you see it could reshape our communities or our workplaces even?
It's a really hard thing because our worldview is so individualistic in in the Western world, like in Canada and the US. So it's a constant. I mean, it will be a constant battle in your mind for if you're like me. Again, if you grew up, I didn't grow up in my indigenous kind of rooted community. It was something that I've been relearning and rediscovering. And there's always a battle in my mind between the individualistic way of thinking and the collective way of thinking. But I see it clearly in scripture. I see it clearly in my cultural tradition. And so I need to always be pushing myself to ask that question, what does it therefore look like? Because it results really in what we say we are aiming to do, for instance, in church community. If you go back to Acts, where they shared things in common, they gathered together regularly around meal, around worship, around prayer, and if anyone had need, they cared for them. This was a beautiful commons. It was the commons, and that is it's very different than how we're taught to be in the world today. We're taught to be consumers. Um, Everything is pushing us to consume. Everything is pushing us to click, to buy, all of those types of things. Um, so if we, if we work to embrace a more collectivist mindset, and a communal way of thinking, like you said, those relational ethics, then it helps us recognize that our decisions always have these reverberating consequences on the people around us, our families, our larger communities, our church, and into the place we are, the community, wider community of creation. So, it goes back to the even further idea that in indigenous worldviews, depending on which nation you're in, that kind of seven generation way of thinking. Some would say you always need to be making decisions for the seven generations away from you. Some would say you're the in the middle, and the three generations behind you have shaped you the most, and you need to think of how you're shaping the next three. So there's differences in how we think of the seven generation idea, but in either way, it's always thinking about other people, right? Your decisions, big consequential decisions, are thinking about your great grandkids. And what does that do? It makes you think about community, right? It makes you remove yourself from the center of your
Mm,
decisions, right? And that is a communal way of thinking.
yeah,
How does this benefit other people?
yeah, yeah. It's funny talking to you too. I'm getting a sense of your personalities. Danny, you said it already. You're like, I'm the idealist here. And don't get me wrong, you can probably do some practical things too. But Chris, I can tell by talking to you that you're trying to make it practical. And
Okay.
so I'll shift it now to Chris, but I want to get specific. Like, let's build on what we just heard here from Danny. Is as we think about this idea of relatedness, we're connected to each other, our ancestors, the future generations, the land. There are many people here who are saying, well, I like that. What are some practices that I can do that can help my body start to believe this? Like, we can intellectually be like, yeah, I like that idea, but our bodies don't have any ceremony, any practices to help us embody this. And Danny, you can speak to it too, but Chris, I'll kick it to you. What comes to your mind when I cue it up that way?
Yeah, not that this would be taken up by people because you don't want to appropriate others' practices, but I will say that I've appreciated this in others' practices and I've been invited into them is, starting off the day praying outside for the Chata and many other traditions, right? You start off with this morning sun prayer, like that you get outside and you are thanking God for this new day. But I've also seen this done in praying to the different directions. And it's not praying to the directions as if they're deities. I want to clarify it, but it's that each direction invites you to think about a different part of life, a different season. They have different values and virtues. And so in some sense, you can think of it as an organizing principle to holistically organize your prayers that see you as grounded in a place with direction and location and with seasons and time that it's just this grounding ceremony. And for some, they may be smudging with cedar or sweetgrass or um, others medicines to kind of bring their whole senses into this experience too, like a reset and a to bring your presence there, moving one away from their screens and doom scrolling, etc. Um, I wish I could say I do that most mornings, but I don't, especially when it's 0 degrees outside and it's very cold. But I do try to
Right.
at least get outside. Um, you know, thinking for those who are in business relationships, and now that I'm moving into this new administrative role as a director of the Indigenous Theological Circle, I keep coming back to this phrase that, progress moves at the speed of trust. And at the heart of trust is relationship. And what I've experienced in the NATES community, more so than I've experienced in other organizations, is this deep emphasis upon relationships, where sometimes I'm wondering, like, man, are we even getting things done? Like, this doesn't seem efficient. And we're doing all these community bonding things. And yet, I also have appreciated the ways in which, when later down the road we're trying to get things done, right? Hiccups happen or people misspeak or whatever. But those things that would become bigger bumps in other organizations or other systems just are things that are laughed at or moved on or just not even focused. Like that, there's so much goodwill and good faith in the people around you because you have these relationships that things move. And I think about so much of the pressures of administrative corporate life that you kind of want to treat people like robots. They have their roles and responsibilities. As long as everyone's doing their thing, that's all we need from people. And that becomes pretty transactional. But at the heart of systems that work well when they're at their best is that people are enjoying one another and people know each other's strengths and the assets that they bring, and they look at each other and not just think, oh, well, these are the deficits of this person or this is how they're holding us back. But there's this deep curiosity and appreciation for what they do bring, and a move to kind of breathe life into those assets from a stance of appreciative inquiry. Um, so these are more systematic things, and if you want to learn more about this, our friend Matt LeBlanc has a whole consulting firm that helps organizations think about asset-based community development and using the lens of appreciative inquiry to come to mission statements and vision and to design your system. Again, that's iEmergence, but I appreciate that. And the heart of that are indigenous values of relationship. That the heart of a community doing well or an organization or a business doing well is the relationships there and treating one another well. And I think sometimes it's always this temptation to move away from it. And the last thing I will say is that even I feel this within my own family system. Like I talk about this all the time. I'm 40. When I feel like when you get to your 40s, you get to this point where like, oh, I'm accomplished. I got my degrees. People are recognizing me for my skill set. This is when I can skyrocket in my career if I want to follow all my ambition. And yet this is also the time where I have small kids. And I have this crossroads of I can either double down and be super ambitious and just do all the things that move me in my career, or I can be with my family and be with my kids during these really important years. And how many people's lives, both in Christian ministry and business, choose choose their vocation at the expense of their families.
Mm-hmm.
And that balance, that relational, that those relationships are not imbalanced. So it's something I am constantly trying to check right now. Is that, am I in good relationship with my daughters? And how's that family system going? So you want it practical. I brought it to, religious,
Nice.
business, and then family. But this is my therapy couch because these are all things I'm trying to work on right now
Yeah,
in this life. Yeah.
I
that's
got to
great.
prove that I'm practical, David. So let me give you two practical things too.
Show us you can do it.
Yeah, show you can do it. So Chris mentioned, our plant medicines in First Nations communities, and tobacco is one that represents thankfulness, where you lay down tobacco. You give people tobacco as a way to say thank you. Now, part of that is you need to prepare beforehand for it. And, it's a conscious choice. There's a recognition. There's going to be things that are given to me in this upcoming day, week, month, year, for which I need to be grateful. Indigenous people will not only give that to others in gratefulness for what they may be offering, but they also lay down tobacco or sprinkle tobacco in gardens or by trees if they pick an apple, or just as they walk through beautiful places, sprinkle it on the waters after they swim. Like there's ways to be thankful. Um, Another practical way for Christians to be thankful right now. Almost always, most of us pray and give thanks to God for the meal. But have you ever thought of thanking the animal and the plants for their gift as well that you're eating?
Mhm.
It's something very practical you can do every day at mealtime. And then the last thing I would say to connect to the wider place around you is are you are you keeping connected and listening to the concerns of the local indigenous communities around you? And perhaps it's time to make the decision that what they are concerned about, I will choose to be concerned about as well. So for me, that means that I regularly read the news of the two closest First Nations communities, as well as the wider Mi'kmaq Council in Nova Scotia. And they regularly put out press releases or concerns. And when those types of things happened, I asked myself, is there something that I can do in support of this? That has meant in the past writing letters to uh, my local provincial person, or sometimes higher up. And sometimes it also means showing up at places, and also rethinking how I might be using something. For instance, just today, literally just today, there was a report that came out from a group of Mi'kmaq people about their thoughts and concerns around big data and AI as it relates to knowledge, indigenous knowledge. So that caused me to stop and say, in what I am using when I use AI, is it being used in a way that is harming the indigenous community around me? So that's causing me to stop and think about things I'm actually doing and using on a regular basis. So keeping connected to the indigenous communities that are closest to you, and saying, I'm going to make a choice to make their concerns my concerns. And then that very Christian practice of thankfulness, but extend the thankfulness beyond God to the other relationships that sustain you.
That's great. Wow. So much good stuff there. In particular, about making the concerns of the indigenous communities your concerns. I love that. How do you recommend people find out that information? I know we have the internet, but most people wouldn't even think about that. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, so one would be, first off, do you know the indigenous peoples of your land? So native-land.com or .ca will help
I
you
think it's
kind of,
CA. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
the people, what are the treaties that govern that area, because you are a treaty person, whether or not you've realized it, right? People entered into treaty in the space that you are usually. And if there isn't a treaty, that's even more significant. That the crown actually has no jurisdiction, but they've taken it anyway, and that is the case in some areas of Turtle Island. So asking that question first, and then also just saying, like, what are the local communities? That's kind of how I've thought about it. Now, it's a little easier for me because Nova Scotia is just Mi'kmaq land, whereas there's lots of overlapping in other areas of Canada and the U.S. But I follow the Facebook and news feeds from the two closest reserves. And that's how I kind of try and stay on top of things that are coming out because they issue those types of releases, etc. So that's how I've done it.
Guys, this is great. We have to finish here, and I want to give you a chance to just give us like a last thought on, as you created this project and you're talking about it now, how did it change you? And how do you hope it will change other people?
I'll start because Chris is still in deep contemplation. I mean, I would say it has been integrated throughout. It kind of arose out of our own journeys. So we started this process of cultural reclamation and wrestling with what does it mean to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus, and Indigenous? How do we integrate those things? And for us, it was also, we are trained biblical scholars. That's our vocation. And so, how do we do that faithfully in the context of being a believer and an Indigenous person? So, and then the other thing I would say, and we didn't mention this before, but part of the process of this book was sitting down with a lot of different Indigenous followers of Jesus, a lot of leaders, pastors across our respective countries, and we're grateful for the support of the Louisville Institute to support that. But relationships change you. So we sat in their stories. We sat in coffee shops. We were in sweat lodges. We put up teepees. All of these things that just built relationships with these new people, and you got to hear their stories, their own. Sometimes it was a struggle like us. Sometimes it was reclamation. Sometimes, there's some beautiful stories of I've never felt any sense that my indigenous heritage was something I needed to give up. I mean, uh, thank God for those types of stories. They're few and far between, but they were just beautiful. So those relationships changed Chris and I and put us in the right mindset and heart place to write a book like this. Um, to exercise our biblical studies muscles that we got, via PhD and graduate studies and all that stuff, and try and put it to hopefully to good use and write a book that we wished we had 10 years ago as we were thinking through all of these things.
Well, Danny took the words out of my mouth, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, I probably could just take credit for what Danny just said and just repeat it. But because seriously, I will sound like a broken record here, but the thing that comes to my mind is again relationships, and I will repeat Danny to say that we did spend 2.5 years just marinating in stories and time with people, and that changed us, and that changed me. And I think today, where so much of my anxiety sometimes is, well, I have to get this done, and what's the most efficient way of getting this done? Why is this taking so long? I think more about, well, who am I doing this with, and how I do it. The process of doing something is just as important as what is getting done. And if it's strengthening relationships or breaking relationships or creating balance or imbalance, these are things that I am slower to think about and consider beyond just the efficiency or efficacy of anything I'm trying to do. Um, so that also plays into my spirituality because I look for it in the teachings of Jesus and I see it in the Bible that the teachings of Jesus are certainly there are things about heaven and there's certainly about what we do, how we get to the afterlife. And yet also so much of the teachings of Jesus really foremost are about relationships and how we treat one another and how we treat the people that we don't want to think about that are easy to put on the side. And that so much of the Christian life is about this path, this journey, or this balancing act of trying to be in good relations, and sometimes we fall, sometimes we stumble, but that there's ceremony and that there are prayers and there are things that we can do to get back into relationship. So it's not all or nothing. The stakes aren't so high, and that we are going to comically fall and trip, but that there are ways to get back into that flow and that confluence of goodness. And so I think about that a lot in my spirituality. If I might add one thing for your viewers, if they're thinking about, well, I'm a settler, what does it look like to be in right relationship with Indigenous people? Or I want to think more about my own ancestry. We're all Indigenous to somewhere, and whether you're German or African American or Jewish, that we all have these backgrounds with very complicated but very interesting histories. And some of the books that I think have really been beautiful. Recently, Jody Sparger, our friend in Nate's, has just written a book called Men that Danny endorsed that talks about land back work in Canada. I can highly recommend a book that's just coming out right now by Daniel Hawk. He's an Old Testament scholar called Undoing Manifest Destiny. And he thinks about his own heritage in Ohio and how his family came here as settlers and the indigenous people there and the long histories of broken trees there, but also engaging this as a Hebrew Bible scholar, thinking about this with scripture. It's beautiful. And then lastly, I think about my friends Elaine Enns and Ched Myers, who wrote Healing Haunted Histories, which is this beautiful guide of reclaiming and thinking about the beauty of one's own ancestry. Even as settlers, there's beauty and goodness there, of course. And yet, that complicated nature of, yes, you may have been a persecuted minority coming into the States, but then also you've come into land that's not on your own. And how have you been a good or not so, how has your family been a great or not so great guest onto this land with the various systems there and so holding all that together and not making a simple dichotomy of like you're either a settler, you're native, and you're a victim or a victimizer, but that like your history is haunted and it's complex.
Yeah.
And also, there's something really beautiful to proclaim that you're not just a white American, that you have this great ancestry behind you too, to think about.
Mm.
You have grandparents and great grandparents who have beautiful treasures to contribute to how you think about and organize your life.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. So good. I'm going to have to go back and listen to all this. There's so many good things I want to go back and write down. I would encourage my listeners, yeah, go back, write some of this stuff down, and check out this book, Reading the Bible on Turtle Island by Chris Hoklotubbe and Danny Zacharias. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
It's our pleasure. Yabuki.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Miigwech.
Now that we've taken a moment to look at how to decolonize the way that we see, how to have a better perspective about how our decisions affect other people, the question is, well, what difference does that make? And I'm going to bring Cherokee author Randy Woodley to join us next time to talk about the Harmony Way and how Indigenous wisdom can actually reshape the way that we live together and even the way that we govern our communities. So thanks for being here. If this has been helpful to you, go check us out on Substack.com at the link in the comments and the show notes. You can drop us a couple bucks a month and participate in a monthly conversation. All the writing there is free, or you can leave us a review. We love that. So thanks for being here, and we will see you next time.
Said I will fly with you. Won't you fly with me over the hills and plains on the wind of a prophecy? Yes, I will fly.